brain bit by bit, I will show images of the hippocampus in patients with epilepsy. The name hippocampus is derived from the Greek word for seahorse because the form of the human hippocampus resembles a seahorse. The hippocampus is involved in learning, memory, and emotional responses, and there are only a few diseases that give macroscopic or imaging abnormalities of the hippocampus. One of them is hippocampal sclerosis, in which the hippocampus becomes hyperintense or white on T2 and FLAIR images in patients with epilepsy. In fact, hippocampal sclerosis is the most common imaging findings in adult patients with partial epilepsy. And until now, it is not clear whether the hippocampal sclerosis is the cause or the consequence of the disease. What you see on imaging is that there is hyperintensity and volume loss of the hippocampus, best seen on FLAIR images, and loss of internal architecture of the hippocampus, best seen on T2 weighted images. When you look in literature, the normal architecture of the hippocampus should be that of two interlocking Cs. And if you are a woman like me, who was a girl in the 90s, when you hear two interlocking Cs, the Coco Chanel mark comes into mind. But the hippocampus has different interlocking Cs. There are two gyri, the dentate gyrus here, which is the first C, and the Ammon's horn laterally coming in, which is the second C. And the mesial end of Ammon's horn interlocks with the dentate gyrus. The hippocampus consists of 3 layers, in contrast to the rest of the neocortex, which consists of 6 layers. And there's another thing striking about the hippocampus, because in the brain, the white matter is on the inside of the cortex, but in the hippocampus, the fimbriae forming the fornix and the output tract of the hippocampus, the white matter tract of the hippocampus, is on the outside. The 2 interlocking Cs are the result from embryonic folding, which is shown in this drawing. This is the temporal horn, and on the mesial end there's dentate gyrus, Ammon's horn or cornea ammonis, the parahippocampal gyrus consisting of 6 layers, and the subiculum, which is the transitional zone from the 6-layered to the 3-layered cortex. There is a hippocampal fissure folding Ammon's horn, resulting in the first C, and then because of the upward movement of the border between Ammon's horn and the dentate gyrus, the dentate gyrus folds around the mesial end of Ammon's horn. And in the dentate gyrus there's neurogenesis until late in adult life. And if you look at these 2 images, I have marked with a yellow line the germinal matrix ventricular lining near the dentate gyrus, and you can see that during the folding it becomes isolated from the ventricle, and the hippocampal fissure becomes vestigial. Sometimes you have some hippocampal inclusion cysts. These are post-mortem fetal human MRI images, 14 weeks and 18 weeks. And on this T1 weighted image, you can see a very thick germinal matrix surrounding the entire ventricle, as discussed in the previous vlog. And the cortical plate also T1 hyperintense, and the hippocampus is still stretched here. And in the neocortex, the neurons from the germinal matrix migrate radially. But in the hippocampus, the neurons migrate more in a zigzag manner, which is probably because the hippocampus is going to fold. At 18 gestational weeks, you can see that the germinal matrix is much thinner. There's a lot of white matter. Still some germinal matrix here near the temporal horn, and the hippocampus has already folded. This is a very beautiful drawing from Cajal, where you can see the hippocampal fissure that disappears, and you can see how the dentate gyrus folds around Ammon's horn. And this is a microscopic specimen where you again can see dentate's gyrus folding around Ammon's horn, and Ammon's horn is subdivided into 4 subfields depending on the cell types. You can see the hippocampus even better on 7 Tesla MRI. This is a normal hippocampus on the right side with the dentate gyrus, Ammon's horn laterally coming in, and some striated white matter in between. And there's hyperintensity of the dentate gyrus and CA4 in this patient with epilepsy. And there are different types of hippocampal sclerosis depending on in which subfields of Ammon's horn and dentatus the sclerosis occurs. It's most often in CA4, CA1, or all of them. The hippocampus is most often depicted on coronal images, but you can also find it on the sagittal images on the floor of the lateral ventricle and on the transverse images just behind the temporal horns of the lateral ventricle. Thanks for watching, and until next time, when we will continue with another interesting mesial temporal lobe structure, namely the amygdala and amygdala enlargement in patients with epilepsy.